This week, we welcome Mike Ware, the Senior Director of Technology at Synopsis, to talk about key findings from the newly released BSIMM11 report. In our second segment, we welcome Jane Spiteri. He's the Solutions Architect and Cybersecurity Specialist, Global Solutions Lead at Elastic, to discuss how Elastic Security is opening public detection rules in a newly formed GitHub repo. In the security news, 3 cybersecurity lessons from a 1970s KGP keylogger. MFA bypass bugs opened Microsoft 365 to attack. How hackers can pick your locks just by listening. U.S. House passes an IoT cybersecurity bill. And the largest hacking campaign since 2015 targeted Magneto stores via unpatched bugs. And 5 lessons that humans can learn about security from their dogs. All that and more on this episode of Paul's Security Weekly.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where exploits run wild, packets aren't the only things getting sniffed, and the cocktails flow steady. It's Paul's Security Weekly. Hackers attack systems that are not patched. You need protection, but virtual patching isn't working. That's why you go patchless. Topia analyzes, prioritizes, and remediates vulnerabilities before they're exploited. Even the 0 days, all from one interface. Security gets better memory defense to complement endpoint strategy while improving overall vulnerability management and compliance. Adopt a hacker's mindset, eliminate vulnerability. Get your 30-day free trial at securityweekly.com/vicarious. Are you an enterprise dissatisfied with overpriced analytics software that can't keep up with modern data? If so, then GravWell is the solution for you. GravWell is an unstructured data analytics platform for enterprises who demand total data visibility across their network. GravWell lets your security team go beyond the SIM and fuse data sources to correlate and answer questions you didn't know needed to be asked. Go to gravwell.io/securityweekly for an unlimited data trial and gain uncompromising visibility today. Elastic Security empowers security teams everywhere to prevent, detect, and respond to threats quickly through a unified solution. And it's free and open, putting you in control. Use Elastic Security to eliminate blind spots by analyzing all of your data, no matter its volume, format, or age. Stop threats at scale with automated threat and anomaly detection. And arm every analyst with fast search and integrated case management. Download or try Elastic SIM for free and experience the benefits of an open security solution backed by world-class security research at securityweekly.com/elastic.
And welcome to the show. But first, let me introduce you to a man who does not like extra queso on his burrito, Mr. Paul Asadorian.
Welcome, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. It's episode number 667, being recorded on September 17th, 2020 at G-Unit Studios right here in Rhode Island. Mr. Larry Pesce is here in studio to my left.
Your left? Yeah.
My left.
Your
my left, yes.
Your other right.
My other right.
Okay, good.
I do also want to say I'm excited to talk about some more stories that are in there, too.
Oh, man.
The operational art of cybercrime. The Gruck posted a really good article. We're going to talk about zero login, at least try and decipher. Did I make a pun? That was a pun. We're going to try and decipher.
Yep, and you were finding some very interesting corollary to some stuff. To
wireless attacks, but also there's another Bluetooth bug. And Larry and I were communicating earlier. I'm like, wait, is this the same or different from last week? Different. I think we did determine it was different. It was different. And there was one other one that I thought most compliance requirements are completely absurd, which is just a very enticing title. On the lines remotely to help with the entire show, which will include interviews and stories, Mr. Jeff Mann is here with us. Jeff, welcome.
Happy as always to be here with you, but gosh, I really want to be in studio.
Yes. Mr. Joff Thayer is here with us. Is that a tobacco field in North Carolina behind you?
Yeah, no, that is not a tobacco field.
That's a vineyard.
That's actually a vineyard in South Australia. So, g'day, everybody. It's good to be here again.
No, it's not.
No, it's not. It's a picture on your computer. Mr. Tyler Robinson is here with us. Tyler, welcome.
That's a kiwi farm. Let's be real.
Oh, yeah.
I thought it was the Oh Brother Where Art Thou cover art, because I had Slack up and see most of it.
All I know is Joff is outstanding in his field.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Just full of dad jokes. Mr. Lee Neely, I apologize. We cut your joke off when we were starting the show because we just had to get started. But Lee Neely, welcome to the show. We love you.
That's all right. It's an old and bad joke. It's not a good one. So
those are the best kinds.
I'll find something better later. Yeah, good to be here from Idaho, and I wanted to thank the West Coast for sharing all their smoke with us. It's been quite interesting.
Yes. Do you have a specific guest or topic you'd like to see on one of our shows? Submit your suggestions for guests by visiting securityweekly.com/guests and complete the form, and we do review those on a regular basis. And now, fantastic, I get to introduce Mike Ware, the Senior Director of Technology with Synopsis, Software Integrity Group, I should say, and a co-author of the Building Security in Maturity Model, also known as the BSIMM, is what I should have said earlier. Those that want to learn more about Synopsis can go to securityweekly.com/Synopsis. Mike, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Paul. It's great to be here. I appreciate that warm introduction, and looking forward to chatting with you gentlemen today.
Thanks for hanging in there for all the pre-show banter. We don't get to talk amongst friends usually until the showtime. So,
and he still called us gentlemen,
right?
Know,
so that's a good sign.
So, Lee, it's all you. Go.
Don't worry, we got plenty of time to wreck that image.
Right.
Yeah, we'll disavow that right away.
So, Mike, I wanted to talk about BSIMM and give us a little background on the history of BSIMM, what it is, and kind of where it stands today.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. Glad to do that. So BSIMM was invented in 2008 by Cigital, and I was with Cigital at the time. Synopsis acquired Cigital about 4 years ago. At the time in 2008, there were many organizations, including Cigital, expressing opinions about how software could be built securely and what organizations should be doing to build secure applications, secure products. So you were hearing things like the SDL, Cigital Touchpoints, the OWASP community had a CLASP initiative. And so at the time, we decided, the world was kind of, ready for something else. Why don't we go out in the field and actually observe what is actually taking place? So we decided to venture out into the field and talk to some clients of ours who we knew had rigorous and mature application security approaches at the time. And we sat down with them and we interviewed them. And we essentially said, we're doing a study. We want to know how software security works in practice. Tell us how you approach it today. So we started with those 9 companies. We took everything we learned and we put it into a framework we call the BSIMM framework, which is essentially a container for various software security activities that we observe in practice in the field. And what we've done over the last decade or so is we've used that framework to measure other organizations. Actually, I was looking at the data the other day. We've done almost 500 assessments since 2008, which is basically every 7 days we've done an assessment of an organization. And there's 130 unique organizations now in the study. And essentially, when we do these assessments, it's a benchmarking tool, a measurement tool that allows an organization to sort of get an X-ray of their organization. We identify all the application security activities taking place. And then they can compare themselves to their peers in the industry, and you can cut that by vertical. So if you're a bank, you can see and compare yourself to other banks in the financial services vertical. If you're an ISV, there's a vertical. I think we have 12 or 13 verticals now in the study. So that's a little bit of the history, bringing you up to speed on BSIMM11. We have 130 firms in the study, roughly 120 activities in the framework, and organizations use that to understand where they are today, compare them to the industry, and build a strategy for the future.
Now, Mike, is this still a self-assessment? Is it something like you send to customers or organizations today, or do you help guide them in the same kind of interview style as you did with the initial one?
So you can certainly self-assess, and I'm aware of many organizations who have done that. So the BSIMM is kind of an open framework. It's freely available at BSIMM11, and you can see all the activities and leverage that to do your own assessments. And of course, we conduct those assessments as well. And when we conduct them, we then take the data from the field that we see and bring it into our data pool, which every year we then publish an annual revision of the report. Based on what we see it changing in the field, we make modifications to the framework. So, for instance, in BSIMM11, we added 2 new activities to the framework based on some trends that we were seeing. And so the advantage for having us come in as a third party, obviously you get the independent review, but you also become part of the community, and you contribute your data to the data set and sort of evolve the study from that perspective.
How do you deal with the inevitable biases? Like, do you find that organizations are sometimes kind of ashamed, I don't know if I want to admit how bad we are in this area, or do you find that people are pretty forthcoming, right? Because they probably want to get something out of the report, right?
Yeah, each assessment kind of has its own tone and feel to it. It's kind of, it all depends on how, the motivations for why we were brought in to do an assessment and kind of the motivations of the organization who wants the assessment done or the measurement done. For the most part, people want to get better and people want to improve. And so this is viewed as a method to understand where an organization is as it relates to, their peers in the industry at large. And so it's viewed as a sort of a process improvement activity, maturity improvement activity. We explicitly say it's not an audit. So it's way different than a traditional audit where we're actually going to look for things and looking for expectations.
How's that working for you? How's claiming it's not an audit working for you? Just curious.
It's about, I would say, there's about 20% of the time when we walk into an audit, probably less than that actually. People will sort of think about it from an audit perspective, but when we do the kickoff of the engagement and we set expectations with everybody who's going to be interviewed, it becomes part of the kickoff process and the level setting around, how we're going to deliver it and what we're looking to achieve as part of it. So it kind of depends on how well the tone and the setup of the engagement is out of the gate. But I would say, 10% of the time, probably, we run into maybe some circumstances with specific people we interview where they think it might be an audit.
And so if you lie, basically you're only hurting yourself, essentially, is the kind of public service announcement for those people. This is to gauge where you're at with your software security maturity, basically, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And so what kind of things are you asking in measuring? And then I guess kind of a follow-up to that, what trends have you seen over the past 11 years, I think is the kind of the more interesting thing, right?
Yeah, no, that's a fantastic question. So, when we go in and we do these measurements and benchmarks, I mean, we're asking various questions to various stakeholders to really understand perspectives from engineering and development, from an architecture group, from a testing group, from the software security group, who is the structure of folks who are sort of dedicated or thinking about application security every day. So your pen testers would fall under that group typically. And, we're asking various questions. Help us understand how you approach training, your developers. Help us understand how you've integrated tools into your pipelines, or how do you approach static analysis today? How do you manage risk across the portfolio? How do you, what's your approach to testing all of the applications in your portfolio? So it's really, these different cross sections from different people, and we start to pull the data together in terms of the types of questions that we would ask. And of course, we ask questions related to policy, process technologies, this kind of thing. Paul, I'm trying to remember what was the second part of your question there?
Yeah. Based on that, just a comment on that quick, I like that you're interviewing not just developers, but all stakeholders involved in the software process, and not just asking questions about technology, but also process and methodologies as well. It makes it, I think, a very well-rounded assessment, if you will. Some, and as Jeff pointed out, some may still consider it an audit, right? But this is to help yourself, and I think it speaks to the management that would help set the tone for that. Now, what trends, Mike, have you seen over time? Because certainly in the past 11 years, the way many do software development very differently from 11 years ago, or at least are very much considering making changes to kind of get with the times, not just from a technology standpoint, but from a process standpoint as well.
Yeah, it's a very good question. And, every year when we do a revision of the report and kind of reflect on the data, we see trends. And of course, that goes into our report. Over the last several years, if we just want to focus on that, it's been about, on the backs of digital transformation efforts happening across enterprises, and this whole, challenge of integrating security better into a DevOps culture, doing software security at speed and at scale. That's kind of been the major driving force between how we're seeing software security get done differently. So what does that mean? Well, we're seeing more and more automation built into CI/CD processes. So, tools integrated into pipelines. That sort of stuff is becoming more software defined in nature. So we're seeing more infrastructure as code, and security, becoming part of that. Governance as code is becoming a real thing for organizations to grapple with and solve for. Governance as code is all about removing the human friction that traditionally exists from a governance perspective. So how do you start to automate some of those governance checks to keep up with the pace of and the speed of how fast software gets released today? I think the other thing that we're seeing, and we wrote about in BSIMM11, the authors did, Sandy Miguez, John Stephen, and myself, is this whole notion of shift everywhere. So back in 2008, we were writing about shift left. And the idea behind that was just figure out how to do security earlier in the development process, right? Shift left. That was the objective. Because software is fundamentally, the way it's developed and delivered is different, and it's so fast and dynamic in nature, shift everywhere sort of extends that across the whole delivery methodology. And so basically what we're saying now is do the testing or do the security activity when the artifact is available and you have the best shot of doing it well. So what that would mean is when something is instantiated at runtime, a container or cloud configuration, maybe that's your best shot of actually doing that security test or configuration monitoring and review. And so that whole shift everywhere concept is certainly a trend that we're seeing now, and the leading organizations are figuring out solutions for that.
Yeah, I find it pretty interesting how we've, even just very recently, changed the conversation about shift left, right? And I think that's a combination of both process and technology improvements.
You said shift left, right?
Shift left, right.
Sorry, you caught me for a minute there.
But that's very telling, right? The kind of trend we're talking about now is shift everywhere. But that's a technology thing as well. And a process thing, right? The technology has given us the ability to spin up environments to allow for a lot more automation in the process, which then has allowed us to make those process improvements. And now it's not just, when we had a more waterfall style, and that still exists today, right? But we would say just go earlier, right? Now we're saying, well, we can really truly integrate with the entire process, and that's a trend I've seen as well.
Yeah, without a doubt, Paul. And the way that I sort of think about that is resilience. You want to have resilience across people, process, and technology, and kind of think about that from a cultural perspective, from an operational perspective, and just how you build software and where you want to hook into that to have resilient operations and produce resilient software. Software can defend itself against attack, and when bad stuff does happen, you have resilient operations to diagnose it, fix the process, not just the software, but fix the manufacturing process and get it right the next time.
Sorry, Joff, did you have a comment, question?
That wasn't me. I'm innocent.
Jeff, anyone more questions for me?
I'm curious if the complexity of kind of all of the technology starting to diverge into software or infrastructure as code, and kind of the gray area that comes out of some of this shift. Does that make the assessments and kind of the way in which you do your assessments more complicated, or does that make that a simpler process?
Well, we certainly uncover new products, new technologies, new things that we need to constantly be learning about, just like everybody else in the security industry. And so the framework is built in a way that it's sort of, it casts a wide net, and it's sort of generic enough that it applies to, software delivery methodologies. So the framework, it doesn't make it any challenging for us to do the benchmarking. What I think is challenging, and just something that we constantly have to sort of build into the way we become knowledgeable, is keeping up with the technologies that we see. So, technologies around identity proxies and zero trust networking and all this stuff that we've seen over the last couple of years. All these products that constantly come out. So when we do assessments and they say, "Yeah, we use this product," we have to know what that product is. And so, it's a constant game to sort of keep up with, the technologies that organizations are adopting. That's the fun part of this as well, is we're constantly seeing how organizations are approaching and what they're using to fulfill certain, requirements and activities.
Mike, there are other kind of trends you've noticed in the report over the years? Are there things that just aren't relevant anymore because we fixed them? Is there a positive aspect to it?
Well, I think I'm very positive and bullish on where we are in software security. I think another trend, if I just reflect over the last decade, is this whole sort of we used to go 10 years ago, security and governance was sort of centralized in nature, is the way I would describe it. So we kind of, in the BSIMM report, we talk about governance-led initiatives. So you can imagine a CISO with a group under him or her, and they do a lot of pen testing, a lot of training, a lot of thou shall do this kind of policy-driven, centralized, push it out to the org. That was 10 years ago, right? Just as a frame of reference. These days, we're seeing much more of a hybrid, I would describe it as, where there's still the governance-led components, but now we're seeing automation be built and implemented to achieve some of that governance. And now in engineering and development, they're taking more and more responsibility on to sort of deliver security as a feature. And sort of, they're dealing with the pipeline problem, the resiliency problem that we were talking about earlier. And so it's much more of a hybrid now. And so we start to hear about things like DevSecOps teams and sort of DevSecOps cultures. That's at the heart of that. How are the governance folks and the engineering folks coming together to accomplish some shared goals? And, that's why I'm kind of bullish on where we are as an industry, because, we've started to make that turn. We still have a lot of work to do. But I'm very positive on where we are and what we're seeing in terms of that partnership and engineering-led initiatives taking on more and building this into their cultures and the way that they deliver software.
Yeah, and I'm seeing that trend too, Mike, but I'm also glad you're doing it's not all like a rosy picture, because we still have a lot of really vulnerable software out there today, right? And that's not so we got our work cut out for us still. But I spoke with another person this week when I talked about that change of creating more functional teams, right, was what you're alluding to. So you have developers, you've got ops people, you've got security people, you've got testers, QA. I mean, really don't call them QA people. They're more reliability engineers, and it's really a developer role, right? Creating those functional teams. That team is responsible for delivering a product or piece of product together as a team, and they don't have to jump through silos and red tape to get things done. They're a functional team responsible for delivering a resilient product, right? And that's a trend I'm seeing. And again, I spoke to another fairly large software company. They were like, yep, that's actually the change that we made as well. And it's the third company I've spoke with that said they're adopting that model. And I like this as a trend very much so, because I think many of us have been in that situation where it's so hard to get security done when everyone's living in their own silo and just pointing fingers going, well, that's not my problem, right? And that's a trend I hope continues.
Yeah. With that partnership model, for sure, the point of the finger sort of goes away, because you have shared goals, and it's all about how you're going to come together and achieve that resilience together. You know, it's kind of a pod model, Paul, which you described, where these different folks are coming together in a pod and they're delivering on the pod goals around resilience. Mm-hmm. And that kind of quality. You know, quality is a big component of this, where security is just an aspect of quality.
Yep.
You know, I'm a software engineer at heart. I started out as a software engineer before I got into consulting, so I'm always going to lean on that kind of, you know, being bullish on what the engineers are doing. That's just kind of the way I'm built and wired. But it's really interesting, you know, the whole cloud sec, container sec, orchestration sec, all of these different sort of DevOps technologies and methodologies. Security is a core feature of that now. Mm-hmm. And there's someone that's responsible for that is sort of looking at that now. And that's why I'm sort of bullish on where we're headed.
Jeff, you had a question?
Yeah, well, probably several questions. Just trying to pick and choose my battles here. What I'm trying to do in my head is try to take what you're talking about and fit it into sort of the traditional assessment models that I'm familiar with.
He's going to say it. He's going to say it.
And my first open-ended question, and it's almost word association. What do you think of? Is there a role for? How does it fit into what you're describing? A software development lifecycle, SDLC.
So software development lifecycle is, you know, just the SDLC part is just how software, the process for how software gets delivered within an organization. Within the BSIMM framework, we have an activity. It's called security. Describe your process for having a security development lifecycle, which is, you know, the process for integrating security into the SDLC. And so there's a specific activity that looks to see if there's a well-defined process for describing how security is integrated into the SDLC. And then there's numerous other activities that describe, you know, how you do code review or static analysis, how you test your applications, how you do that at scale across your portfolio, and that kind of thing. Does that make sense?
It does, but I'm curious. Is it called out specifically, or is it sort of, you know, built-in activities, and you know, if they don't, you know, if they're not careful, if they don't pay attention, they're going to realize they're doing security activities. I mean, to what degree are you Jedi mind tricking them to get them to follow a security development lifecycle concept every step of the way?
Well, one thing to keep in mind is the BSIMM assessments. We're simply describing what we observe. You know, so it's a descriptive model. It's, you know, like I said earlier, it's like taking an X-ray of the organization. So we're not really telling them to do anything. We're just going in and observing what the organization is doing. So without a doubt, we'll uncover that they have some type of SDLC. And then from there, we'll peel back the onion, tell us about what activities are integrated into your SDLC from a security perspective. And then from there, we start to unravel that even further to really understand, you know, how software gets delivered securely, or what the organization's approach is for that.
Gotcha. Do you ever introduce yourself as the Bobs?
I'm sure we have some assessors who try to work that in, just to add a little bit of, you know, comic relief if there's a little bit in the room and whatnot. But that's usually not my style when I do the assessments.
Gotcha. Final question, final thought. I was reading through the BSIMM, that there's a link in our show notes. So, you know, very brief introduction, and there was some reference to, and I think you spoke a little bit about it earlier, about sort of the legacy of compliance frameworks and compliance, you know, being one of the reasons why organizations have to, you know, put their software development programs through some sort of observation, let's say. in it, the guys are waiting for me to say a certain 3 letters, and it's related to that. But I'm curious as to whether you're familiar with and how, if and how you've ever applied something within the world of the payment card industry is called the Payment Application Data Security Standard, the PADSS,
along with PCI.
related to PCI.
Oh, he finally said it.
Yeah, that's right.
It was either that or it was going to be the NSA. I mean, that 3-letter acronym there.
All right, everybody
I'm
drink.
not. Yeah, I'm familiar with PCI DSS and the standard around that. I'm not familiar with the PADS. I'm not a qualified QSA or anything like that. We do have expertise within our group.
Right.
So I'm familiar with that. BSIMM is just a different philosophical approach. It's not. We don't think of it as a compliance tool. It's a measurement tool. It's producing a scorecard that you can reflect on to understand where you are, where you want to go. It's not producing findings.
Mm-hmm.
I guess the objective of those other frameworks.
I was beating around the bush maybe a little bit too much. I guess what I'm curious about is, you're going into these organizations, talking to their software teams, observing them, trying to give them feedback, trying to help them grow and mature and produce secure code. Ultimately, many of these programs sooner or later are going to have to answer to some sort of compliance program. Very likely it might be PCI. To what degree do you sort of not teach them to pass the test, but prepare them to be well equipped and ready for a PCI assessment? And the flip side, to what degree do you go out and try to reach out to the QSA community and try to get the assessors indoctrinated or accustomed or used to your approach and your sort of way of doing things, which is perfectly legitimate and appropriate. But to the audit mindset, if it's not a square peg fitting into a square hole, there's some in the auditing world and even in the QSA world that are going to that's not what I'm looking for. Norman does not compute. So do you try to reach out on the assessor auditor side, at least, to prepare them and educate them on this approach so that so that they know it when they see it and are comfortable with it and accept it?
Well,
and if not, you should.
We certainly do a lot of work with the standards folks, and we have some folks that are involved with the PCI committees who are looking at this, and so we do that from a partnership level. And then when we do an assessment with an organization, the purpose of the assessment is to improve their maturity to put them on a path to improve maturity, and so. That in and of itself should help them prepare for an audit that may come later, right? Help them prepare from how are we going to train our workforce to meet those audit requirements that might be in PCI DSS. How are we doing from a strategy around testing our applications, and are we doing that at scale and adequately to meet those other requirements? And so I think doing the measurement and then doing a plan and a strategy for improving based on what the scorecard says and the reflection of that can help you prepare for those other activities. Mm-hmm. And some activities in the BSIMM itself, we actually look at how the organization is consuming regulatory and compliance measures and then sort of distilling that down back into the software development teams so that they can fulfill those requirements. So you think of encryption, like for payment card data. There's an activity in there that speaks to how well the organization is consuming the compliance requirements and then acting on that from a software development perspective.
Gotcha. Cool. Thank you.
Mike, where do you find that, at least recently, where organizations are most deficient, right? And I don't mean that in a negative way, right? But if we can learn where we have the most work to do, across these organizations, across all these verticals, I think it's a useful exercise. Do you look at the data in that way?
I would say, what stands out to me is architecture and, activities like threat modeling, thinking about how software is going to get attacked, and then making sure you have defenses built into the design of the software. that tends to be a practice area in the BSIMM that a lot of organizations struggle with if they're not sort of really critically set up and structured to deal with that every day, and to have sort of a dedicated person thinking about security architecture every day. Not that they have to be dedicated, but they need some rigor around that. So architecture kind of remains this hard to do practice that we see. I would say the other thing, just looking at cross practices in the BSIMM, is achieving scale. Achieving testing at scale. Many of these firms in the BSIMM, they're some of the largest organizations in the world, so they have thousands of developers, thousands of applications and products in their portfolio that they manage, and so trying to scale static analysis, security testing, figuring out the best approach for pen testing across that portfolio and doing that cost effectively, figuring out the automation piece of that and doing that across all of your build environments and your tech stacks.
Consistency is difficult. Someone else was talking about that this week, where it's great, to have functional teams, to have, managing all of the thousands of developers and thousands of applications. But part of that management is making sure every team is held to the same standard and that there's consistency across those, and scaling out the right way to do things across all of that is one of the more challenging things in enterprise software. Yeah,
without question. Scale and consistency. The other thing that sort of comes to mind is metrics. I think many organizations still struggle with getting the right metrics in place and to make them actionable, to produce really insightful things that allow the organizations to make risk-based decisions. I think metrics, it's easy to gather data. It's harder to define the right metrics that work for your organization. And so I still see that as an area of opportunity as we move forward.
Do a lot of the metrics center around like basically Jira tickets, right? And can you pull out like the security specifics from there, like average time to fix a bug? But even at that, like I know from also being a developer, right? There's a lot of nuances in there. Is that metric really useful?
Yeah. There is a lot of nuance. I think that's the things most organizations struggle with, is how do you go from just collecting data around number of vulnerabilities you have across your networks or your infrastructure, your applications, number of bugs in your cloud configuration or in your container configuration. How do you go from that to understanding, okay, we just invested in all these activities to get better from an engineering perspective. What is the return on that? So, some organizations are looking at defect density, right? And seeing, okay, well, how did our security defect density improve after we adopted, a new pipeline approach for scanning our applications? And so, there are some different things that organizations are working with, but, in large part, I still feel that is an area of opportunity for us to focus on it as an industry.
Absolutely. To go back to threat modeling, are the organizations just not doing threat modeling? Are they not doing it enough? Like, what are the ways in which we can improve on that threat modeling process?
I think it's the scale problem. I think we need more automation to help with the scale, and then we need more effective mechanisms for helping engineers, just understand how to do. I like to say, make it hard or difficult for developers to make mistakes. Right? It should be easy for developers and engineers to deliver secure software. Make it hard for them to make mistakes. What does that mean? Give them libraries, give them frameworks that are secure by default. Not that we have to give it to them, but help them build that stuff, right? That fits within their environment, that fits within their tech stack. That's a problem that we're looking at as well within Synopsis. And so, I think it's, part of it is understanding the attacks, but the attacks are always going to be sophisticated. The attackers are always going to do their thing. There's always going to be new ways to attack software. So I think we have to focus on how do you just engineer things the right way, the correct way, and make it difficult to make mistakes, based on the decisions that you make with your tech stack.
And that's hard from like when you're in the design phase and the architectural phase, that's a difficult thing to automate and to have a framework around. Like we were having a conversation actually just today, and we're telling our developer, like, no, like it really has to be done this way. And he's like, well, I believe you guys have been doing security for 20 years. He's like, but he wouldn't necessarily have gone down that path, right, until we had to have a discussion about it and lead him down that path to speak to the scalability of it all. Like, how do we get developers in that same kind of mindset to go, like, when it's public facing to the internet, that should be a separate database from the rest of it, and like how well separated should that be? And it takes I think a security engineer to really kind of bring that threat and impact to the conversation and kind of do the threat modeling and derive the right architectural decisions. It's hard to give developers those tools because most often it's a discussion, which to your point, like, doesn't scale.
I think the emphasis should be on discussion, though, Paul. I'm sorry, Mike, because too often I've seen, and Mike, you alluded to it, or I think in more or less your introductory statement, or maybe it was Paul, I don't know. Somebody said silos, and I've worked with too many organizations where each silo, all they really care about is their little small piece, and I wouldn't trust any one of them, including an architect, Paul, to have the big picture necessarily, without sort of bringing everybody in and let's put it out up on the whiteboard and figure it all out. Just a suggestion.
Well, it's easy in our small team, right? All the stakeholders were there in our meeting this morning. In larger organizations, that's a lot more difficult.
Point well taken.
So sorry, Mike, my question for you is, how do we enable developers to derive at the right architectural decisions for security?
Yeah, I think we just have to continue to partner with them and rather than force something onto developers and engineers, approach it from a kind of a listen first, kind of point of view. When we go in and we understand what their tech stack looks like, how they build their software, how they deliver their software, what kind of technology decisions have they already made and invested in, and then from there reflect on, okay, well, if your stack looks like this, if you're in the cloud, using containers and orchestration technologies, let's now figure out what a secure configuration of this looks like, and how can we tailor the tools and the techniques available to us to, build as much automation in the pipeline as we can to reduce friction, right? We don't want to slow down releases. We want to enable releases, but we want to keep the defect density down. And here's the approach for that. So I think it's just more of a partnership kind of thing. And then from the architecture side of it, helping them understand, how architecture will get attacked and how you can defend against that, and then helping them build the, into the frameworks and the libraries to defend against them, I think is a core piece to just having that type of partnership with the engineering side.
Yeah, I think there's still, security is very much still a governance role, helping to set policy. What I like in some of the newer models is there are functional security roles, whether that's a physical person or just part of the development cycle. But security is still that kind of almost a stopgap measure to help determine like what breaks a build, what forces one architecture decision versus another, right? And being that kind of oversight, but not in a siloed model like we had in the past.
Yep.
More questions for Mike?
Yeah, I had one.
Oh, go ahead, Lee.
A minute ago, Paul talked about different measures for internet versus internal applications, and I'm wondering, with the way things are getting architectures, is there really as much division of internal versus external apps? And should we be pointing developers to develop, whether it's internal or external, to the same level of security?
I should have clarified, Lee. I was talking about unauthenticated versus authenticated.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So, but still, I was wondering about that. Are we seeing fewer internal-only apps because of how our workforce is architected? And I don't just mean this year. There's more and more remote workers.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I mean, clearly with, the state of the world and COVID, cloud demand has skyrocketed. Everybody's investing in the cloud related technologies to deliver things that more flexibility, deliver faster. I think that there's still, it depends on how you sort of are architecting your network and your infrastructure. But what I'm finding more and more is that, you have an engineer, developer, one day he's working on a microservice that's internal. The next day he's working on the external microservice, right? And so it's tough for them to, sort of understand which service they're working in. And so the best way to do it is just to treat your entire workforce like they need to develop secure software and have that mindset, right? So as developers or dev teams move from one project to the next, they take those concepts with them across the culture. And they don't have to, sort of be mindful of the fact whether it's an internal app or an external app. And, the policy is made different because it's hard to do risk management across all of that, right, within a large organization. But the developer's mindset, the engineer's mindset will still sort of, be from the point of view, let's just build this right.
Right. Well, I've noticed that there really isn't an effective way to have two different rule sets. It's better just to do it with one.
Yeah, that's a really good way to put it. Yep.
Mike, anything else you want to share with our audience about the report or in general about application security?
Paul, I don't think so. I mean, this is a really good conversation. I appreciate the opportunity to be with you guys, and appreciate all the questions. I think we covered all the ground that I thought we would today.
Sweet. We just have 5 questions left for you, Mike. We call them 5 questions with Security Weekly, and there are 5 silly questions we ask all of our guests the first time they come on the show.
Okay.
3 words to describe yourself.
3 words. Wow. Okay. Reserved, quiet. Reserved, quiet, and committed.
If you were a serial killer, what would be your weapon of choice? That was an evil laugh, Mike. Kind of scared me there.
Yeah, my mind just doesn't work this way. I would say a knife.
If you wrote a book about yourself, what would the title be?
My life story.
In the popular game of Ask Grabby Grabby, do you prefer to go first or second?
First.
Choose 2 celebrities to be your parents.
Alive, dead, fictional, or otherwise.
Otherwise.
Damn it, guys.
Be more coordinated there.
2 celebrities. Wow. Okay. I would say Michael Jordan. That'd be a cool one. And let me see. Wow.
Doesn't have to be gender aside. It could be two dads, 2 moms, whatever,
Alive, dead, fictional, or otherwise. And
right.
Fictional may be considered a legend in your own mind, a celebrity in your own mind.
Yeah, I'll go with another sports figure. I'll do Cal Ripken.
There you go.
MJ and Cal.
It's a damn good pair.
Mike, thank you so much for appearing on Paul's Security Weekly.
Thank you so much, Paul. I really appreciate it. Thanks, guys. Really appreciate it.
Folks who want to learn more about Synopsis, you can go to securityweekly.com/synopsis. Check out the BSIMM report. Links are in the show notes. With that, take a short break. Come back with our fine friends at Elastic. Stay tuned.